I am Raziel.
Everybody, welcome back to episode 3 of Raziel and Romagus Deduce and Discuss. And the topic for today is leadership, and mainly leadership and how it can apply in MMOs, online games, gaming in general, and life in general, and how it can translate back and forth. Real quick, a quick PSA before we get started. Next week's episode, we will be guesting the YouTuber Josh Strife Hayes. He also runs a Twitch channel, and the topic of that will be on the meta in MMORPGs. So I just wanted to put that out there first and foremost, so you guys are aware that episode 4 will feature a third person if you're getting sick and tired of listening to us two fuckers. But anyway, man, how have things been going for you? It's been a pretty fucking wild week nationally, huh?
Yeah. I don't know. For me, it's been pretty chill. I've just been holed up here in my house. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I've just been working, but my work is effective tomorrow. Everybody is required to work from home for at least 2 weeks, and then they'll go from there.
Oh wow, you guys are affected by the corona?
Yep,
COVID-19?
we are affected. I mean, every state is affected in some way, but it's mostly precautions of just to prevent the spread of it. I know the state I'm in is banning any gathering of more than 100 people.
Wow.
The NBA has shut down. If you saw
Crazy.
that, it's pretty nuts. And the craziest thing about it is people somehow think that if they have lots of toilet paper that they're going to be safe. I don't fucking understand it. I mean, diarrhea was listed as a very rare secondary symptom, which most people who get, the virus never get. But I don't know why people think all of a sudden that they're going to start shitting all over themselves. I don't understand. But hey,
that's really weird.
Bunch of dumb Americans. What do you expect?
Yeah, I haven't had the I'm actually I'm kind of near one of the sources. Ground zero, and I haven't really.
Aren't you kind of out in the boonies though?
I am. Yeah, I'm kind of far away.
I'm deep in the metropolis city, so we're taking some pretty big precautions. Which it doesn't affect me too much because when I'm not working, I'm usually gaming, and when I'm not gaming, really the only outdoor activity I do is I go skateboarding, and you pretty much don't fuck around with other people. I just go by myself. So
yeah, it's really reclusive. Not like a contact. It's not a contact sport,
so. Right? So I'm not in really any huge amounts of danger. But anyway, other than that, I've just been dealing with little Roz has been having some health issues. He probably has DLE, which is just a form of it's an immune disease. It's not super dangerous. It just affects his nose starts to rip open and ulcerate. And so they have to, it's a long process of getting rid of the ulcerations and controlling it, but you
got to keep putting them in the cone.
Yeah. It's not too expensive and it's not too bad. So, I'm just trying to keep him around as long as possible. He's getting up there in years, but anyway,
I hope things turn around for him.
I do too. We'll see.
Yeah.
But let's get into the topic. So you picked this topic, leadership. Do you want to go ahead and talk about it? Let's just try to stick to our notes in order as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I wanted to cover a little bit of feedback. There wasn't really much from last week, except for on your video, had a reference to someone named Aaron Carey, which I'm unfamiliar, so I'll have to look that up later. And then I think it was Chocolate Hater.
Oh, Aaron Carey is the author of the book I mentioned, The Curse of the High IQ.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then Chocolate Hater said, "Keep it up. He likes listening to us." So
it's great, man. As long as at least even if it's one person is listening, I mean, that's what it's for. So
indeed,
I'm good for that.
Yep.
So, what was your motivation on talking about this topic?
Well, leadership is important, and it's inevitable, and it crops up in many different ways. If you can't really lead yourself, even you can't lead a group, but there are a lot of people that think that they can, or that they know what the way is, and then they try to force that on other people, and it really doesn't work well once you start getting into group dynamics, kind
Absolutely.
of knowing the pecking order, or even like when you should speak up, when you shouldn't speak up. So
Sure.
In MMOs, it's imperative to know and to just kind of go with
paramount
the flow.
if you want to get any group content done that's beyond like easy face roll shit.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
And
so,
I mean, speaking from experience here, it's I mean, I have a lot of experience with leadership, both outside video games and in the MMO space. I mean, back in World of Warcraft, most of the original vanilla WoW, I was in a guild and we high end rated, but I was just one of the masses. Because let's face it, everyone back then, even the best players in the game, they fucking sucked at the game. Like people just didn't understand the game yet. So fast forward, to midway through Burning Crusade, where I was made an officer in a world racing guild, and I was the warlock class officer, and then I've been the guild master of several guilds in several different MMO games. I've been the leader or an administrator, is what they called it, in several big clans that spanned multiple games. And you can definitely see when people are placed in that position out of either they were afraid to say no and ask if they were interested, or they thought they could do the job and went in there and ended up causing nothing but problems.
Most of the leadership problems that I see come from a leader who then just makes someone else a leader because it's their friend.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely.
Even though they're just completely incapable and completely incapable
or uninterested in the role at all.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
No, I totally agree. And something you got to understand that I've taken away from it is when you're put in a position of, let's say, power like that. I mean, it's still just a video game and whatnot. But when you're put into that kind of position, people start to look up to you, and they not just look up to you, but also expect a lot from you.
Indeed.
They want you to help. And where this can turn into trouble is, and this is ultimately one of the factors that has burned me out on many an MMO, World of Warcraft especially here, is when you being a leader, you realize over a course of time that you're not so much a leader anymore as you are a fucking babysitting handholder, where you might as well be playing the game for them. Mm-hmm. And you do that so long that it burns you out, man. That shit will burn you out twice as fast as any experience in a game you can just get on your own.
I've always felt like a lot of followers in MMOs, they treat it like it's the leader's birthday party. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, I wasn't a very popular kid in school, but when it was my birthday party and I'd go outside, everyone would come follow me. And I remember being kind of keenly aware of like, wait, I'm not this like born type leader guy. Like, why is everybody following me? And it's like, because of the context of the situation, they like, the day it's supposed to be about you. It's your birthday. So you de facto become the leader. So if you start a free company or a guild in WoW or something like that, people will ultimately just expect, oh, you're the leader, so you do all this stuff.
Exactly. And like a good example of that is like the free company I made in Final Fantasy 14. I never made my clan with the intention of like raid leading or even doing anything like that. It was all just for fun. And so if people were interested, people that follow me on Twitch and whatnot wanted to play with me or talk to me in game, they could be in my clan, but it wasn't like an organized clan of, hey, let's go do X, Y, and Z. That's the purpose of this clan. But in the past, I've definitely been parts of those kind of guilds. And I think you're right when you say that some people, you can usually tell who and who does not have leadership qualities pretty quickly, both in real life and in game. You can just kind of see how they carry themselves. Most people are followers, and there's nothing wrong with that. Without followers, nothing gets done. There's no one to lead, and that's okay. It's completely okay if you're a follower type personality. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of people though that think that being a leader is some kind of glorious, holier than thou position when it really isn't. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time crunching and number crunching. It's a lot of hand holding in some cases. It's a lot of organization, and having confidence. And confidence is something you can learn and you can build. But
yeah,
I agree. There's an innate, like, I wouldn't even call it a talent. I would just say it's a personality trait that some people are natural born leaders and some people just aren't. And that's fine. I've kind of always felt and have been told that I naturally do have the kind of leader thing where it comes naturally to me, but it doesn't mean I'm immune to the pressures of it or immune to, like being overwhelmed by it. Because anyone, whether you're talented in it or not, will get consumed by that if they're not careful and get burnt out. And that's what happened to me.
I've never really met a natural born leader or someone who I would claim as a natural born leader, because always when I look into their background, there's always a reason why. I guess you could say that maybe my older brother was a natural born leader, but just by the very face of it, he's the older brother. It had nothing to do with his genetic makeup. It had everything to do with that was the birth order.
I don't even think it's genetic makeup is what makes somebody natural. I think it's how their personality developed over time makes them where, like, let's say X thing happens to two different people. The same thing happens to two different individuals in their life, right? At the same point in their life. One person responds in a way that it builds character, and that's how they become, and it builds confidence, and that's how they become the natural leader. And then it keeps carrying and building as they go on and have more experiences. They just take the reins and say, fuck it, I'm going to control this. Right. So we have some order in this chaos. While other people will experience the exact same experience, but instead they'll look to someone for help, someone they can follow to get out of it. And those are the people that naturally don't look to take the reins.
Right. And there's good followers. I wouldn't even call them followers, but like to an extent, just people who have their eye on the same goal.
Right, but they need that push or that point from the leader, which was what I experienced. Some of the best people I worked with, both in my work, because I was a manager for a huge company, over every technician in the company for 2 years, and this applies to in-game shit too, in MMOs. The best people in the clan or the guild or my coworkers were the ones where I knew that if I just said, "Hey, this, and this needs to be done," and I knew they would do it. I knew they'd be on it, and they do a damn good job. And
you wouldn't have to like watch over them. Exactly,
because that's exactly what I'm saying. There's a difference between being a leader and saying, "Hey, I'm going to steer the ship. This is the direction we're going, but I need all hands on deck." And then there's a difference between that and the person who holds everyone's fucking hand and is pretty much doing all the work. So they're not really leading anybody. They're just shouting commands and then doing all the work themselves.
Yeah, that's not. I've met both kinds. And even leaders that are in that position, and they don't really delegate or relegate properly. Right. That's a missed opportunity of leadership.
Absolutely.
Like, for example, even followers need to have something that they're in charge of. In order to be a part of the group, you have to have some sort of special ability or special skill that makes you worthwhile. And you're in charge of that aspect of the project that needs to get done. So like for example, with the roles in Final Fantasy 14, there's the tank, there's the healer, and then there's the 2 DPS. Right.
And I think I kind of find it funny too, right? That usually in MMOs, when you have the Holy Trinity like that, for some reason, the leader usually by default is just expected to be the tank.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's because they're the ones that face off against the enemy first.
They control where the boss goes.
They initiate contact. And so that's usually why. I know, at least in 14, I think they purposefully designed the jobs that way because the tanks their rotations aren't as in-depth as the DPS. So I noticed, I remember my first time in turn 9, and we had to mark things for dive bombs. Mm-hmm. And I think it was the scholar told me that the tank should mark. And I was like, why do I have to mark? Because I wasn't really keen on leadership then. He's like, well,
Right.
because the DPS had to focus on DPSing. And I was like, well, there's nothing to attack, so why don't they mark? And it's like, because at that point, you're not really attacking anything. There is no DPS uptime. All you're doing is waiting. You just have to mark the places and then run to the correct places. But then I figured, like, I mean, granted, I probably should. So that's
Right.
kind of where I started to kind of take the reins in that perspective. And from that point on, I realized, like, yeah, I mean, the tank's rotation, he doesn't really have to keep it up so much. So he should be in charge of relegating points and sort of making call outs and stuff. And that's what I ended up doing later on when I helped.
Right.
I would usually help random pugs try to clear turn 9, and I had macros and stuff ready for each phase, so
Yeah, it's something you kind of evolve yourself and adapt, and if you embrace it. If you shy away from it,
right.
My advice is probably not roll a tank, because it's kind of expected of you.
Yeah.
But that's some really interesting points. But how do you think that the danger of, if you're a leader, whether you've chosen to be a leader or whether you were kind of forced into that role, how do you feel about the danger of it feeding the person's ego? What damage can you see there?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of times people will take those positions thinking that, like, that was their whole intent. It was something kind of like how a narcissist might start a Twitch channel, or a narcissist might start a YouTube channel in order to be famous. Some people who kind of already aren't in the right mindset will take on those roles of leadership, or roles that are imperative to completing a position, just for the fame of it and just for the ego boost. And
just so they can push everyone around, essentially.
Right. Precisely. Yeah. And they kind of get a kick off of, telling other people what to do.
See, and that's, from my experience, I mean, I've definitely seen that. I've never personally let me being a leader in an MMO, because I mean, I was a raid leader for, a heroic and mythic raiding guild in WoW for a better part of a decade. But I never let it, never affected me in that way, but I've definitely been in guilds where there were people that it did affect in that way, where it just turned them into total pricks to everyone all the time, where they're not joking. They're taking themselves and the game and other people's actions way too seriously.
Right.
And granted, like, I definitely was in the position where I had to remove someone from a raid because either they kept making the same mistake many times, or they were being an asshole to somebody else, or they were, if in any way they were holding the rest of the people back and they weren't willing to adapt or capable of adapting to fix the problem over a pretty extended period of time, you have to make calls like that as the leader. It's like, hey man,
right.
you're just not there. Either your damage just isn't there, or you're getting fucking killed by everything, the same things over and over and over again. And it's gone into the point where you're wasting everybody's time. Like, we would have had this killed an hour ago if you weren't here. You do have to make calls like that. But then you see clips on WoW, or I don't know if it's still on the internet, but there was a soundboard that somebody made called the Troxed soundboard, Troxxed, and it was this old guild leader from World of Warcraft's like Burning Crusade days and Wrath the Lich King days, he's like the raid leader, the guild leader, and I don't even remember what his clan's name was. It was pretty famous at the time. They were a pretty big deal. But they made a soundboard out of him because he was such a power-tripped cockhead fucking bellend all the time. Like, that's all he was all the time. And it was so funny to listen to these clips. I'm sure you can still find it somewhere. But it got, to the point where it's like, dude, I wouldn't want to be in that clan, and right. I'm sure half the people that stayed in there did it because at some point they didn't feel threatened by him. They just thought it was funny. It was like,
right.
It was a joke. Like, so you can't respect somebody like that. No. And if you're a leader, you need to be respected. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. If you're not respected, then you're not really a leader.
Well, and it takes a bit of humility,
Sure. Absolutely.
I think I think a good leader understands the gravity of the position that they're in and lets it humble themselves rather than lets it be an ego trip.
Right. And a good leader should never be beyond constructive criticism.
Exactly.
That's something we had all the time back in a lot of my old raiding guilds. Is after a raid was over, all the officers would meet in a Discord, or back then Ventrilo channel, and discuss what went well, what didn't go well, and what we can do to improve. And there were many times that what we could do to improve was an officer problem. Like, you could have done this, and even directed towards me, like, hey, you could do this better. How you handled the situation could have been better. Things like that. And everyone in that room, when our clan was running it smoothest, would just say, yeah, you're right. And we'd fix it.
Yep. Well, that's one of the biggest differences I've noticed between Sargantinus and Balmung. A lot of egos on Balmung. A lot of people that are kind of in their own little safe space. Right. And this is not to say that everyone on there is like that, but I guess when it comes to the duty finder, there's a lot of it's all about me. While a recent farm party for a ruby weapon, I had a really great group, and everyone was on sort of the same page of we need to get in as many rounds as possible. So the countdowns were short, and the fixes weren't overly explained in between deaths. So we got a lot, and that practice party turned into a clear party, which then turned into a farm party, which it's kind of rare on Balmung. Like, usually it's a practice party, and then the next day you get together with the same people, it turns into a clear, and then sometimes the clear turns into a farm. But usually they're like separated by days rather than the actual party forming and developing into each other.
See, and I've been raid leading, and in Final Fantasy and in World of Warcraft, and every MMO pretty much, our group content is a focus for so long now that I'll even find myself many times in party finder groups, savage and even not savage. Like, if someone's dying to something, just instantly, without even hesitating, typing in what they should do. And there's either, you get one or two reactions. Either they'll just not say anything or go okay, and they'll do it and you'll get a clear, or you get the guy that's, you don't pay my sub, fuck you, and that's just kind of what you got to deal with, especially in random pug groups, because it's not a guild. They're not gonna respect you to necessarily go, oh, this guy's our leader. Because a lot of time in those public groups, usually the first person who ends up speaking up, everyone goes, okay, listen to that guy, he's the leader. Yep. And that's just how it goes.
Pretty much.
But I think it definitely, you have to let it humble you. You have to be open to criticism. You have to be ready to take on anything that may come your way. But again, don't cross into hand holding. Like, you shouldn't be teaching people their DPS rotations. Right. You shouldn't be teaching people that, hey, you don't stand in this basic fucking ground mechanic that's been in the game since you were level 1. Yeah. Stuff like that. And at the same time, you've got to take care of yourself, and not, because that's, like I said, leads to burnout so fast when you keep helping too much, and you'll crumble under the pressure. You'll just completely fall apart, and it'll burn you out of the game. It'll make the game you're playing feel like a fucking job.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's how leaders are made. Because we talked about how they're natural born leaders, but sometimes there aren't. Sometimes no one wants to lead, but someone has to. And sometimes you can either crumble under the pressure, or you can rise to the occasion. And then it's usually in those instances where you rise to the occasion, and you realize that it isn't so bad. And that's how a lot of people complain about anxiety and stuff like that. And a lot of times it's because they're just they haven't put themselves in the uncomfortable situation to begin with.
And to be fair, another thing I meant by natural born leaders too is, if there's no one that wants to lead, like this even happened, to me, right? There's no one that wants to lead. it's not hard in a guild to go to take a look at your roster and say who would most likely make a good leader for X thing. Mm-hmm. And names will come to your mind, and it's not because they've ever been a leader. It's because just their personality and how they carry themselves and portray themselves, you could see them doing a good job.
Yep.
And so they have that natural tick, whether that was they were born with it or whether they developed it through their life experiences. Those are the people that you generally ask first. You're obviously, if there's some lazy, 15, 16-year-old kid in your clan, which I don't recommend. I don't recommend anyone have anyone in their clan that's under 18. Just putting that out there. But if you're that little kid, he's not probably going to be the first person you go to, because you just are like, he probably either can't do it or won't be interested in doing it, or will jump on it because he thinks it's going to give him some power, but he's just going to be a huge cock and nothing's actually going to get done.
Yeah, well, sometimes those guys are the most vocal,
Sure.
And so it could be one way or the other. Because a lot of people respond to vocal leaders, they think that is the de facto best, or that they should go towards that. And that's usually not what defines the leader. But I think more often than not, when you're dealing with a group of adults, that tends to be a much finer thing to go off of to decide, especially a group of adult strangers. The first one to speak.
They haven't met in real life, right? Right. And I think you're right that there's two kinds of leaders. There's vocal leaders and silent leaders. Definitely in all my time as a leader, I was very vocal. But I've definitely been with some silent ones. But I think this ties into something that's, I think there are vocal followers and silent followers too. And in the same token, there are vocal kind of what's the word I'm looking for? The ones that want to cause a mutiny. They like fight back on everything you say.
Right.
There are silent people like that who will just do whatever they want anyway and fuck everyone in your group. And then there's the ones that'll just fight you on everything tooth and nail vocally that you say. Because like they're like, no, it's this way. No, this is the way you do it, man. Just you got to do it this way. And it's like, hey, dude, I'm the leader. You may be right, but let's try this the way we've been doing it. And if it fails, then you can explain your way and we'll see if that works. But they won't even consider that. It's like their way or the highway, but they're not the leader of the group at all. And pretty much all they weave into the conversation and into the content is more chaos and trouble for the rest of your group.
To make the leader seem like they're incompetent when they might not be. Yeah, and just throwing a wrench in the works. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of dickheads like that out there too.
Yep.
You got to be aware of.
But I know one example of like a silent leadership. I know this is kind of what I stepped into was, and it's usually the silent leaders that don't realize they're in a position of leadership to begin with. I remember back in high school, all I did was I just trained as hard as I could to help out the team be the best that they could. And then I ended up being recognized by my ability and was put as captain of the football team. Even though I knew that I was captain and that I was in that leadership position, it never really sank in just by either being in that position how much the rest of the team had looked up to me, specifically the underclassmen, until some of them would they literally came up to me, and I had like thought of them as a leader in their own part of the team.
Sure.
And they'd come up to me and they told me straight up, like, hey, I'm really proud of what you do. I was like, wow, really? He's like, yeah, you're quite an inspiration for the rest of us. And I was like, wow, that was wild,
Right. It's totally crazy when stuff like that happens and you have no idea that you've been putting off an air of confidence that you didn't know you were.
Correct.
You were just doing your thing. Mm-hmm. And people look up to you and look to you for leadership. I mean, I experienced this in a Sharon's call where I was one of the first people in the game, not the first, but one of the first to discover the battle mage spec, which ultimately became like the go-to spec in Assurance Call. Like if you were a mage, that was the build you went. And I didn't really know. I just went around and just was like, hey, this build I made's pretty good, and I was just kicking ass with it, And then out of nowhere, like over time, I'd start seeing my character's name get mentioned on the Assurance Call forums, and then people would start whispering me in game and asking me things and asking for help and for advice. And I was like, wow, holy shit. Like, okay, this is cool.
You just kind of fall into it.
And then a similar thing happened in real life too with, I remember when I was when I finished my degree in acting, which is fucking useless now, but when I finished my degree in theater, I had already acted professionally for a while, because there was a huge break for me between when I finished my associate's degree and when I finished my bachelor's and on my master's degree. There was a huge gap of time there where I was working professionally on stage and all around the country and on film. And so when I went back to school to finish my degree, I was older than a lot of the people there, a lot of the students there, by probably anywhere between 5 and 9 years between the young freshmen and everything and me. And I'd go in there and I didn't realize that all these other actors, all these young actors, looked up to me, and because I was already so accomplished in their eyes, while with me I still felt like I hadn't done anything yet. Right. And to them I was so accomplished. And I still remember this day, one of the guys that to this day we're still really good friends, this actor, we became really good buddies. And one night we were getting drunk and talking to each other at this, the show after party. And he said to me, he goes, man, the first time I saw you, because I knew who you were and like I knew your work. He's like, but the first time I was in a show with you, I was so terrified to come up and talk to you, because I just knew that I would say something fucking stupid and that you'd make fun of me. And and I looked at it right in the eye and I go, that was the stupidest shit I've ever heard. And I made fun of him. Right. We had a good laugh, but I was like, really, dude? He goes, yeah, I was so intimidated. I just thought like, dude, I haven't done anything yet. I'm just barely in school, and he's already accomplished so much on his resume. And I'm like, dude, I'm just a human being just like you. Right. Yeah. And I kind of always give off this air of being a prick. In fact, I was talking to my manager at work today, and he's like, hey man, because we have offices, my company has offices in Japan and in Ireland and in Africa. We have companies all over. And we interact quite a lot with the people in Ireland. Mm-hmm. And they're under the impression that I'm a huge asshole in Ireland. My boss like, when you talk about that, and he's like, because I know you and I know your sarcasm and I know how you carry yourself and the things you say, you're mostly just messing with people. He's like, but it's not translating on our text chat in the company. Like, it's not translating there. They think you're an asshole. I just started laughing. He's like, yeah, dude, it's not a big deal, but we just got to tone that down. But it's just funny how it rings true throughout your life, that natural qualities that you have that draw people to you, intimidate people, or make them view you as a leader carry through all the mediums you interact with. Yeah.
Well, a similar situation occurs in the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo, where I know there's this, having played the original 7, sure, everyone knows that Cloud becomes the leader, and right, and how that comes to be wasn't able to be quite explained.
That's a perfect example. Yeah,
because
he's kind of shoved into that role, like he unwillingly becomes the leader. He even has that scene in the original. Obviously, we don't know how this will play out in the remake, but in the original, where he's on after he comes back from being revived or whatever,
after Midil,
yeah, mm-hmm. And they're all saying, "Hey, you're the leader," and he's like, "Oh, okay." I never know you view me that way, but let's go. And then he tried to come up with a plan. But the whole time he was gone during the Midil instance, when, for like half of disc 3, where he's not there, everyone's talking about how they're so lost without him.
Right.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have Barrett, who's always kind of a natural leader, but sometimes he's silent and sometimes he's vocal. But I say he's more vocal.
He tends to be more vocal, yeah.
Yeah, and he's like this. he's like, I always want to be a leader. And I remember in the original, he said, I've always pictured myself as a leader. Mm-hmm. And then after Cloud comes back from Medeal, he goes, but maybe I really wasn't one. Maybe I'm just not cut out for it. And then he just deferred to Cloud at that point.
Well, and the same with Sid, right? Because Sid, he was a leader. And so that's the thing too. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean you're a leader of everything. And doesn't mean that you're a leader all the time.
Right.
In every situation.
Sid's a good example because he commands respect and leadership with his team of people that work on the rocket and everything.
Right. Correct.
And he just falls into that role instantly, even when those his subordinates haven't been in the scene for the whole game. The second they show up, it's just like you understand their relationship.
Yep.
But
and I've personally worked with men. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've personally worked with men that were in leadership positions in the military, but we were in the private sector, and they didn't want to be in leadership. Right. They'd already spent 20 years doing it, and they didn't want to. Man. You know what's that?
It burns you out, man.
Yeah, I mean,
it really does.
It definitely can. And I remember at my last job specifically, there was this guy. He was in the Air Force, and then he was a manager for 20 years, and now he was just a lowly warehouse guy. And management kept asking him, "Hey, man, we've got a position opening up over here in Idaho or whatever. It pays this, and this." And he's like, "No." And it's because he was already set. You know, like he already had his nice house and his wife, and he was already getting his kickbacks from military. The only reason he had a job, and this was the same with both of the military guys that I worked with, was the only reason they had a job was because they wanted something to do throughout the day and get paid. Might as well get paid for it as well.
Might as well get some extra money with his time.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and those were the coolest guys to talk to because one, they had been in leadership positions, so they could talk about what it means to be a leader. And two, they didn't want to be a leader at that time, so they were much more willing to like listen to you and do what you told them to do because they didn't want to have to think about it, right?
Right.
And so they would open themselves up a lot more, and it's a lot easier. I think when it comes to the sort of like student mentor relationship, like those are the best kind of leaders, or those are the best kind of mentors. The mentors that don't want to be leaders, but know like what it takes. Man. Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting because this goes back to what you were saying that with that guy in the military and with Sid's relationship between his subordinates and Cloud. And you get in certain situations, and depending on your personality type and what you have led in the past, you'll automatically go, okay, I'm clearly the best person for the job in your head. And you'll just take the reins and people will just accept it because they see it too. They're like, oh, okay. Right. Like, I'm glad we have someone showing us. Like that tend to happen with me in several theatrical situations, like cast disputes versus, mistreatment from either like management or producers, things like that, which isn't common, but things like that. And in the MMO space, it's usually, I just default, like it takes me a couple minutes and I see it and I go, okay, I'm the raid leader. Like this is what I'm going to be doing because otherwise it won't get done. And you step into it because you can do it. Yeah. It's when it's designated on you, like, hey, you are the raid leader. And then you do it for a long period of time. Yeah. Until you cross into, like I said earlier, hand holding and babysitting, that it burns you out.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's always great to have people that are willing to take that position while you're gone. Right. Or people that are willing to step up when you kind of aren't in the mood,
Yeah. There were many times I wanted to quit WoW and I couldn't because I was the main tank and the main raid leader and either the guild master or one of the higher officers. And I knew that if I left, everybody would be fucked because there was no one that could replace me.
Yeah, I had the same scenario in my last static where I was just personally getting burnt out, and I felt really guilty for leaving. But they were pretty young dudes, and a lot of times gossip ended up taking kind of control of things. And I remember like constantly telling them like, "Hey, did you like instead of talking behind people's back, have you ever, decided to bring talking it up to them?"
Yeah. Say it. Say, hey man.
Almost all of the issues that I was noticing with the static
primarily
came from no communication.
And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, what you end up being in the MMO space as a leader is you'll see like two separate parties constantly fighting each other and being fuck sticks to each other. And but neither one of them will just come up and say, "Hey man, I have a problem. Let's squish this." You know, they'll keep doing it until you go, "Fine, come here, bitch, and come here, asshole. We're putting you guys in this voice channel, and I'm going to mediate, and we're going to figure out what's going on because either this gets fixed, or one of you or both of you is out of the guild because this can't continue." And I've had to do that many times. We call it Raz's Shack out back. I'm not even kidding. We call it Raz's Shack out back was the voice channel, and no one wanted to go in there. No one wanted to be called in there because they knew I was going to rip them apart, and I wasn't going to let it go until it got resolved or they quit. Because I knew, and we'd have to take too many people back there, but it happened. It happened where it's like, you're the shed out back. You don't want to go out there.
Well, and that's another thing about leadership is being able to, all the individual groups they can all be great as individuals, but it's when they come together and bring their different strengths together where it ends up turning into where everybody else, where the parts are, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's not just about the individual, and any leadership that can sort of tease that out, where they can bring people who wouldn't have otherwise been able to be up to snuff or whatsoever. That's a great way to sort of. That's a great sign of even silent leaders. So in the example of the remake, when Barrett and Cloud are they're in the elevator and the reactor's gone off and there's a big explosion, and Barrett he's losing his shit, right? He's like, come on, and you see his fist tensed up, and then he kind of looks over his shoulder and he sees Cloud, where he's just sitting there. He's calm, cool, collected. He's just kind of letting the storm around him blow over him. Like Cloud in this instance is being a rock in the storm. And then the camera pans back over to Barrett, and he realizes that he's kind of letting his emotions take control of him, despite the severity and the emergency of the situation. And then the camera pans back to his clenched fists, and he slowly lets it go. Because it's like, when you're around people that kind of can stay calm,
keep their shit together,
that then is contagious, and it helps people who would otherwise be susceptible to the situation also calm their nerves.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree completely. And I definitely think the least successful leaders are the ones that get overly emotional. I mean, obviously there are caveats to that. Like, fucking Adolf Hitler is a good example. I mean, all his speeches, he was way over the top and super emotional, flipping his shit out. And that was just because of the social climate that he was able to get away with that, because he just played on everyone else's emotions.
Well, and that's another weird thing about him is it's like it's hard to, like, you could see how his speech is so impassioned, and how that concept in and of itself can get people to
get them riled
up. But at the same time, I think in the modern age, we've been able to look back at that specific example and see how that's less of an example of rationality and more an example of pushing people to a point of desperation.
Right. Pressing the right buttons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And
yep.
Yep. And so
that's how dictators rise to power, is they're able to do that, and they can only do that. They can only do that when what they're trying to get to follow them is in a severely decrepit and broken state. It's like at the bottom of the barrel. While true leadership and healthy leadership is best when the group is healthy as a whole.
Right. Yep, exactly. Well, and like I would say, good examples of sort of beneficial behavior would be people who have their eye on the goal and are able to work in the team in order to realize that goal. So like police, specifically like military, and police are another example. It's especially harsh for military people because, like, sometimes the leader will literally die. You know, and you like everyone in the chain of command needs to be able to step up into that position. You know,
Yeah,
so
I agree.
even if you're,
that's why I think it's best, especially in the MMO space, that one of the first things a leader needs to do is set expectations show everybody, let everyone be crystal clear on what the goals of the group are, and then only recruit and allow people in and allow people to follow that whose goals align with your own.
correct.
Because if you're constantly fighting people who have different ideas and different goals, then your guys are never going to get anywhere. You can get burned out and everyone's going to get frustrated. And unfortunately, in the MMO space, that's very common.
And another thing too, to sort of stave off burnout is, again, like I said before, is to be able to pass on the baton to the next person.
Right.
So like, for example,
make sure you're recruiting someone that's capable of being your replacement.
Right. Well, and then also like giving them the ability, and giving them the know-how, to be able to take over while you're gone. Right. So like, for example, if you're a raid leader and you can't make it one week because something happened in real life, the rest of the team still wants to raid, and they shouldn't have to depend. Like, they shouldn't always have to depend on your presence in order to get the thing done, because a good leader knows that, like, he can teach his subordinates how to lead in his absence. Right. So that they can still get the job done and they can still continue on without him. And so it's, you sort of have to be able to be willing and able to pass the baton off. There's some leaders, like this has been my detrimental examples in real life, where they hold everything to themselves. They don't want you to be independent. They want you to demand that you go see them all the time before doing anything. Yes. They don't trust you with anything, and to the point where, and then if you come up with a good idea, they will tell you that it's bad, and then they will mention it themselves in a meeting or something.
And that's 100% due to a power trip, trip control. And 9 times out of 10, people and leaders like that, if you even want to call them leaders, their own fucking life is so shit. Their real life is so shit. And most of the reason why their real life is so shit is because of their own bad choices and their own behavior. But they won't ever admit, they're incapable of admitting fault. They're incapable of accepting responsibility and accountability for said choices. And so the MMO space as a guild leader or a officer in a guild is the only way they feel they have any value as human beings anymore, and they abuse the shit out of that power.
Right. And well, it's because they're using it as an emotional crutch.
It's an emotional tampon, man.
Exactly. Yeah. They're using their position as a leadership to sort of, again, feed their ego, emotional crutch.
Validate themselves.
It's a form of, they form people around them in order to express their catharsis, or maybe they have some kind of retribution in mind, or some sort of like unspoken of vengeance, and and that's why, and that's bad both politically and in the MMO space, and
absolutely, it's not a leadership quality.
Team. Yeah, exactly.
And so, right, my advice to anyone listening who's in a clan like that has a leader like that, you're not going to fix them. Get the fuck out. Yeah, find somewhere else to go. Yeah, or you're going to be just as miserable as that cunt. But. Well, yeah, man. I think we covered the topic pretty well. I think it was a good topic. So let's talk a little bit more about next week, because I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, me too.
If you're unfamiliar, people listening, if you're unfamiliar with Josh Strife Hayes, his YouTube channel, and he is a hardcore MMO person. With his channel goes very deep into issues. Him and I have some. I just discovered him like a month ago, and him and I have I noticed after watching his videos, very similar views and some very similar videos about the same topics in the MMO space. And obviously I'm more vulgar than he is. So we have our differences in channel, far more brutal, but his points are just as valid. And we're going to have him as a guest on the show next week. We're probably going to record it the same way that we're doing right now, though I have dabbled with the idea of just streaming it live on Twitch, but I think we need a little more time for that to get to that position. And just because he's been on the show once doesn't mean we won't have him on again at some point. And so maybe doing a live Twitch stream kind of via, state of the realm type stuff, quality is in the future for him in another episode. But I'm really excited. So because of that, because of the time difference, because he is in the UK, there will be our videos will probably get released a bit later than usual, but all the videos should still be out by Friday.
And is he on the page of that we're going to be covering the meta?
Yes, I've talked to him, and we're going to be discussing the meta in the MMORPG world. Cool. The goods, the positives, the negatives. Can't believe I use the word the goods. That's fucking retarded. But positives, negatives. Is the meta something that's ever going to be going away? Is it going to be with us forever? Stuff like that. So we're just going to rip it apart. But anyway, thanks for listening, guys. This has been Raziel and Romagus. Go ahead and say your goodbyes there.
Yeah, see ya.
Yep, and we will again all the links to our channels, both our streaming channels and our YouTube channels, are in the description below. If this is the first episode of ours you've watched, go watch the other two. Right, this is episode 3, and next week will be episode 4. So thanks for listening, guys. We love and appreciate your comments and your feedback. If you have any ideas for a topic for us to discuss or a guest to have on the air, please send it our way, and we will definitely consider it.
Good night.
Keep it real.